Hola, amigos. Welcome back to Cage Cash Podcast. I'm here with my brother Ryan. I'm John. We're going to be breaking down UFC Fight Night. What is this, Ryan? 87 we're going on?
I believe so. John.
All right. How are you feeling about Saturday's fights?
Yeah, man, this is gonna be awesome. In Mexico City, really fun, kind of top of the card. A lot of great, Latin fighters fighting throughout the main card and the prelims as well. So a lot of fun fights. Maybe a little bit less name value as you go down the card, but obviously two really big fights at the top of the card. John, I know you were talking about it too. Two really interesting matchups. Obviously, we saw Royval pretty recently, right, in his in that title challenge against Pantoja, but was dominated and controlled on the mat. Essentially, that was only, we'll get into it, but it was only 2 months ago or
Yeah.
3 months ago, right? But didn't take a lot of damage and is coming back here quickly and going to be a really interesting fight here against Moreno. A bit of a different style matchup, right? But some of those same things could come into play. So that'll be a fun one to break down. And then you've got Rodriguez and Ortega too. Obviously, Rodriguez has been on a bit of an upward trajectory, barring that loss to Volk, the last time out, but was looking really good up until then, right? Had beat Josh Emmett and was kind of rising up the ranks. But you flash back to 2 years ago, right? Brian Ortega's last fight, that was against Yair Rodriguez when he broke his arm, right? And in that first round, Ortega was winning that first round, in pretty much everybody's opinion, right? And was getting the better of Rodriguez and even some of the striking exchanges. So it's a really interesting fight back, just seeing Ortega kind of coming off that extended layoff, right, where Rodriguez has had a bit more maybe momentum on his side. But yeah, John, I mean, it's some really fun fights, and I think just excited to break this one down and looking forward to kind of the scope of UFC we've got coming forward. I will say though, John, quickly before we get into the fights, I was a little disappointed by the UFC 300 main event announcement.
I don't know.
You can share your thoughts as well. I think it's more of a fact of, McGregor was not going to be able to fight on that card, right? And I think they booked themselves thin elsewhere, right, where they had signed up all their stars other places, right? I don't think they wanted it to be Leon versus Bilal for the 300 main event, right? And this kind of became the next best option. But it's a little surprising you don't even get like a random, Nate Diaz fighting whoever, right? Or just like some kind of like name value card that has absolutely no meaning, right? Like a BMF type of situation where you get some big names in there. Obviously it's an interesting fight between Hill and Pereira, and obviously a good fight, but for maybe kind of what you were anticipating, John, for UFC 300, does it live up to the way they're hyping up this card in your mind?
For me, I think it does. I think we follow a lot of the fighters. We know Hill, we know Pereira. Obviously, it's going to be a great fight. And I think for UFC 300, such a loaded card. Obviously, it'd be nice. I think probably the plan was to somehow get McGregor the whole time, get Izzy back. And I just don't think they had any way to get that done. The rest of the roster's booked out. You already have O'Malley and Cheeto booked. So, I mean, all things considered, I didn't hate it, but I can see why people are getting pretty heated online about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the question, right, John? Like, to your point of what's the other fight then? Like that becomes the challenge, right? Of, I guess, if not them, then who, right? It's probably Bilal and Leon or something, right?
And like I don't think
that's not a UFC 300 main event,
yeah,
right?
maybe Leon has a little more name value, but at this point, I think Pereira is up there with anyone. And I mean, yeah, I'm fine with it. I think Leon Bilal is a boring fight that no one wants to watch as the main event. At least we're going to get likely a KO. We'll get into that. But for right now, Ryan, well, quickly, let's actually get your get your thoughts. You brought up Volk. We know you're a big fan. Let's quickly break down the knockdown that we saw last Saturday.
Yeah, John. I mean, that was tough. Volk is definitely my favorite MMA fighter. Probably, the hill I've died on since I became a big fan. Kind of watching him, just dominate, working his way through Holloway, all three times. It's the reality of MMA that as a, as somebody trying to, make money on this sport at times, right? It's like the thing you don't want to come to grips with, right? Because it's that battle of being a fan and like having that bias towards fighters you come to love, right? And like the hindsight of kind of everything coming into the fight, right? Like it's silly money on Volk, but at the same time, like you have that trust from years of experience and years of being able to kind of rise
But
to
I'll say it, Ryan. I
challenge.
think we both said it to each other. We were watching together. Volk comes out. He's got Zuck behind him.
Weird.
It felt very what is it, Rocky 3 when he's got the fame, he's got the glory, especially in the UFC. Whenever you see that start to happen, and I'll take some blame here. We were sitting there watching start around 2, and I'm like, it didn't. I wasn't worried about the power. All of a sudden, I felt good about the first round. Volk
Because
had
he
the
looked
sixth
okay, right?
round.
And he started to come back at the end of that first round, but it came back to, and it makes you start, it doesn't bring anything into question Volk did, right? But it's, has he faced the biggest power punchers throughout his career? You kind of go back and look at it, like, no, not necessarily, right? Like,
Yeah,
yes, there was more durability there. He fought guys like Josh Emmett and whatever, right? And he got rocked by Chad Mendez, right? But you have to question whether age has to do something with it, right? And you have to assume that it does in this case. And it's just,
they can just
it's tough to
snowball
see
quick.
because I don't know. I just struggle too, because it's like Alex Volkanovski is, he's one of the top 5 MMA fighters ever, right? But he's one of those people who never necessarily got that same level of superstardom and star power, right? Like he made 500 or whatever this last
I don't know
fight
though.
out.
I think at this
Well,
point
I mean, he'll be
he's
okay,
hanging
right?
out with Jamal Murray. He's got Zuck behind him. He's training
And doing
Zuck.
whatever else. But my point is, right? Like I don't think it's a situation where you're getting to the end of a great career, like you're a professional athlete in all these other sports, right? And you can be content with kind of what has happened because of also the position you now find yourself at in life from like a financial setup for the rest of time, right? Like I don't necessarily get the picture that
Well, I mean, look at Cejudo. Cejudo had everything you'd want in the UFC. He had 2 belts. He had the former.
but sure, but I just don't.
He
I mean, it's,
retired and he came back because I think
well, and he has his own gym, right, and continues to make his money in like other ways, right? I just don't. It's not as easy of a transition for you get to that peak in the UFC. It's such a shorter period of time, and the money you make at the top is so much less unless you have that superstardom, right? Or I guess your window to really get those dollars is so much less, right? That like
I don't think you're close.
it would be terrifying if because I could see it all slipping away very quickly, and like it's sad as a outside observer, right? Because I want him to continue to be successful, right? And I just like where does he go from here? Obviously, he continues to fight, right? But like is, I don't know, right? Does he probably doesn't get back to that mountaintop, and is he kind of set up for what's next? So
You never know
that's a
though. I
lot
mean,
of speculation, obviously, but it's more of a point of not Volk necessarily, but fighters reaching the end of their peak in the UFC and MMA, right? And how you transition after that, right?
yeah. I mean, I think with Volk, the thing that us fans can hold out hope for. He really, to your point, the rest of his division, there's no clear threat to him still, even with Ilya up top. So I mean, I think he can get creative at this stage. To your point, his name value has gone up so much recently that maybe he can take obviously he'll go for the belt again, but you can go for the big money BMF belt or the whatever Dana, right? And I think at this point at his weight class, it's not like we've seen with other fighters where they're completely off the mountaintop. I think he's still right there. So excited to see where he goes. Like we talked about, some other great fights on the card. We had Marab taking down Henry, which was another fight that was honestly kind of tough to watch as a Henry fan. But Marab, that was pretty awesome, carrying him over in front of Zuck, kind of building the brand of his own that we haven't seen maybe quite as much on a mainstream
and he's been
level.
coming, John. It's interesting, right? Like even leading into this fight, I feel like
he's a social media guy.
That wasn't always the case, right? Like the love for Marab has grown, right? Or I guess the willingness to, because a lot of people didn't like his style, right? And like, but I feel like as he's embraced, the personality and getting on social media and stuff like that, right? Like there's more of a contingent behind him, which is good, So I'm excited to see that fight with Sean O'Malley. I think Sean O'Malley's in for a really tough test if he can get by Cheeto Vera, because it's such a clash.
Yeah, did you see that video today where Sean?
I did, right? And he's like, I'll take him on, but it's just a really interesting fight. So I don't know. Sean's getting ahead of himself because I think Cheeto has you don't think so, but we'll
he's not going to break his leg again.
We'll get to that one next week, I think. But anyway,
to your point. With that said,
let's jump into this. And then, I mean, thank God Robert Whittaker survived that head kick as well. I thought the night was over right there when he took that late head kick from Costa in round one, but battled back. And, I don't know if they were 30-27 scorecards, but I thought he got the job done. So fun fight there as well.
Yep, you're spot on. Let's hop into it, though. As we said, we're going to be breaking down every fight from this weekend, February the 24th, down in Mexico City. We got 13 fights coming at you. And if I can get my computer to work, we're going to hop right in to the early prelims. And I can. All right. First up, we have Mohamed Naimov, the Hillman, 10-2.
Sick nickname.
Coming in out of Tajikistan, fighting out of Denver. He's 29 years old. He's going up against Eric King Silva, 9-2. Coming off a loss. He opened up as the moderate underdog here, but it has ballooned up to plus 425 as of when I looked earlier this afternoon. Ryan, give us your thoughts here on the first fight of the night.
Yeah, John. I mean, to your point, this line has really ballooned here throughout the week. So, I mean, you saw a lot of people getting in on this number around like the minus 300 earlier. It's ballooned all the way up to like 5, almost 6, right? I think at this point, it's probably a dog or pass situation. I think Naimov's a pretty decent fighter. He's had a solid run in the UFC, right? He beat Jamie Malarkey when he first came into the UFC, got the job done there, and then beat Nathaniel Wood as an underdog last time out as well. Nathaniel Wood didn't look great, and we saw Naimov get rocked in that fight as well. He's strong on the feed. He's got a kind of decent all-around game, but is going to look to keep this standing, whereas Silva is going to be more looking to close the distance and try and get this down on the mat. But I don't know. Naimov is not a minus 600 favorite against anybody, in my opinion. So it's a straight pass from me, from a betting perspective. I don't think there's a lot of value in this fight either way, but
yeah,
at this line, I mean, at a 20% implied probability, right, at plus 400, I mean, I think you're starting to get into, you can't justify that favorite price, right? So I guess I'm betting more against the favorite price than anything else. But how do you see it, John?
Completely agree. I have this as a stay away. I was looking at it earlier in the week, like Naimov at a better number there.
Like
Obviously,
if you parlayed him at minus 300, even like fine, like that's probably not a smart bet, but
yeah,
I mean,
exactly. I mean, it's ballooning up. I think you got a massive age difference here. Obviously, Silva coming off the loss. I see.
like
I see
he was
why.
the guy. He came out. He was on what's it called? Not Road to UFC, but
Dana
the
White
reality
Contender
show,
Series.
Ultimate Fighter,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And he kind of came in there as an old ass guy on that team, right? And lost his one fight there, and here he is, right? So it's not like he has the goods or anything like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Totally agree. All right, let's move on. Neither of us have anything here. On to the next fight. We have Victor El Magnifico Altamirano going up against Lipe Dotanta dos Santos. Victor coming in 12-3 from Mexico, but fighting out of Texas, former LFA champion. He's 2-2 in the UFC with his last fight being a unanimous decision loss to Tim Elliott. He opened up at plus 210. That moved pretty quick to plus 300, and now it's back around plus 245. Felipe Dos Santos coming in at 7-1, but UFC debut, he lost unanimous decision to Manel Cape, and he's just 23 years old here. Ryan, I told you before we started, I have Altamirano by decision. I'm going to wait to give you the breakdown there. I want to hear what you think about that.
yeah, John. Look, I mean the metrics would disagree with you, right?
No, I'm a
Dos
tape guy.
Santos is 10 years younger, right? They're going to have similar height and reach, but Dos Santos is probably coming out of a better camp and definitely is the UFC A side, I would say, in this matchup, right? Coming out of that Diego Lima camp in Brazil, that shootbox camp, right, with Charles Oliveira and kind of the rest of the team there. So definitely has some height behind him. But, I think this is a situation, John, where we're overrating his loss, right? So he came in here and fought Manel Kape on short notice last time out. Manel Kape is a top 5, top 10 fighter in the world, right? In the weight class. Put on a pretty decent performance, right? In the fact that he didn't get smoked. I mean, did he ever look like he was going to win that fight? Not necessarily, right? But did he stay in there? Did he give Kape some challenges in certain spaces? Absolutely, right? So I mean, it was a very strong performance in that respect. But I still think we just don't have enough data on him at this point, John. Again, just to justify like the price tag that he's getting, I just like he hasn't won a fight in the UFC. How can you make him a minus 300 favorite? And he hasn't had a contender series fight, right? And Altamirano, he's not flashy. He doesn't have any power. He's just kind of like he's like what you imagine the 125-pound fighter to be, right? Like he's very just like fast and volume and isn't gonna wow you a lot of the time, right?
Yep.
So yeah, John. I mean, I'll agree with you. I'm gonna take a big underdog shot as well here on Victor Altamirano. I'm just gonna fade kind of the debut here of Dos Santos. I think he's a good prospect, but I just think Altamirano, has a better shot than the line indicates. So I'm not gonna take the money line, but I do like some of those props you were looking at. But talk to us, John. Why do you see the decision as maybe a good path for Altamirano when you were breaking this down?
So I was diving into the lines, diving into the numbers. I saw minus 200 to go the distance here. Obviously, you see Dos Santos coming in with that unanimous decision loss in his first fight. Maybe we really don't know if he has that power, has the finishing upside at this level. Then you got Altamirano, who, to your point, nothing flashy about him, but I think he's going to be able to score, be consistent. He is the older fighter, but I think in this situation, in this atmosphere, It's gonna be one where a guy who's experienced and can put numbers up. And then for me, it came down to the assumption that we might get a little home cooking here if this goes to decision. You got your first Mexican fighter of the night. It's going to be rocking in there early. It's not going to be a Vegas Apex or a fight where everyone's showing up in the final main card. I think we could get some wonky scorecards this Saturday, Ryan. What do you think?
That's a great call, John. I didn't think about it that way, but you're definitely right. This is a fight that definitely has that possibility, right? And in the books, waiting it to go to decision. I will tell you the other way I'm looking to attack this fight is an Altamirano KO prop. Now this might not make a ton of sense, but he does have one UFC KO. It came early, and that's kind of what I'd be looking for here, right? I'm kind of buying into the pressure spot for for Dos Santos and Altamirano, maybe just catching him on something early. So you look at those lines on the KO, and I mean, it's insane. You're getting plus 1,400 on the KO right now, which just, I mean, blows away kind of the averages, from a divisional perspective. And then I also, the round one KO at plus 3,000, the average odds, if you were to take all of all the guys at these weight class, right? The average odds there are around plus 1,000, right, for a first round finish by KO, right? So I think you're getting a ton of value just based on the fact that we haven't seen Dos Santos finished, and he had such a good performance his last time out, right? But MMA is such a you're there one night, you're not the next, right? And I think you're really getting a bunch of value there based on the previous performance from Dos Santos, and not necessarily taking in, Altamirano's, albeit ugly, but like decent performance in the UFC fight, right? He's won a UFC fight,
And I think you got to factor in Dos Santos. He's going to be coming in. To your point, he had an impressive debut, but he's going to come in and need to probably make a statement in his mind, right? He's going to be aggressive. He might not respect Altamirano at the same level as his debut, and that might lead to some sloppiness, some over aggressiveness. Hopefully, I like that. I might take a look. Right now, I'm going to stick at by decision, but let's move on to the next fight. This one, Ryan, might be my play of the night. We got Luis Lazy Boy Rodriguez going up against Dennis Psycho Bondar.
Well, John, if it's your play of the night, why don't you break it down for us first, and then I'll see if I agree.
All right. So you got Luis coming in at 15-2. He lost his fight in the Contender Series, and he opened up. Right now he's sitting at minus 120. So he opened up at plus 145. We're seeing the movement over to his side already. And then he's going up against Dennis Bondar. And if you take a look here, he's coming in 19-4, but that's 2 consecutive losses. First, KO Malcolm Gordon. That was 2 years ago. And then a decision loss to Carlos Hernandez coming 8 months ago. And
that was the one where he, it was a decision loss, but remember he got knocked out when he got slammed or whatever. If you go back and watch that, that's a crazy highlight to go back and watch, but go ahead.
Yeah. And I think one thing about this fight that really stands out is the activity. Obviously, if we click on Bondar here, he's coming in. Look at this. His last win's coming in August of 2020. He hasn't been an active fighter. He's had 2 losses since then. And he's going up against Rodriguez, who does have finishing power. He's shown an impressive career so far. He did have that loss in the Contender Series, but since then he's gone back and gone on a run on some smaller promotions here. I think he's a guy with a lot of potential who came up short in that Jerome Rivera. But if you look at that Jerome Rivera fight, that was a really lengthy, taller fighter. He must have had 3-4 inches on Rodriguez here. And Rodriguez was entering that fight at only 22 years old. So I think the fact that he kind of got grappled, he got taken down, Rivera had his back a few times in the clips that I watched. I think this is going to be a much improved fighter coming out here, and he's going up against Bondar, who I really don't think has shown much in his career, and in his two most recent fights hasn't been impressive at all. So I agree with the market here. I think it's moving. I think it should be moving quicker to Rodriguez. But Ryan, what do you think?
Yeah, John. I mean that's an awesome breakdown, and I tend to agree for the most part. Bondar is definitely a good fighter, but we for whatever reason, right, haven't seen him in the octagon. And when we have, it hasn't necessarily been a great performance, right? So, I mean, when he got signed to come in, he looked like a top prospect, got 10 wins by submission in his career, right? 4 by knockout. So gets that finish, gets that early finish, right? You know, I don't know. I feel like people don't look at him as a submission threat in the same way they do other people, even though you go back and look at his record, like pretty much every one of his fights is by submission for a long time when he was getting wins. So that's just an interesting kind of tidbit there. But yeah, I mean, you brought up a point that I wanted to touch on, John, which is I don't know why, but Bondar is unhealthy or he's something. Every single one of those canceled bouts that you see before you is due to a Bondar withdrawal. Not, normally you see a guy who has a lot of canceled fights and it's like, okay, like they cancel a lot of fights, but there's always, somebody else withdrew or something too, right? Like it's all Bondar. And he has had some different injuries and things like that. But, I question whether he's starting to get a little bit over the hill. But I think the fight's lined appropriately because we don't really know the quality of Rodriguez's grappling defense, right? I think that's what this line is coming down to, because if Bondar can get on top, can take him down and control him there, right? He looks like a minus 1,000 favorite and probably gets a.
But Rodriguez has had some.
I tend to agree, right? But I think that's where they're seeing the path to victory here, right? And then also, the fact that I think, Bondar is going to have a 4-inch reach advantage here, right? Even being the older fighter, and he's not slick on the feet, but he can keep it at range. And to your point, right, that one loss that we have seen from Rodriguez recently, he struggled with that length. So I think those are the things that people are seeing on the Bondar side. But I tend to agree with you, John. I like Rodriguez in this spot. I think he's, the more flashy prospect and has a better chance to kind of get this done and get the home crowd fired up there in Mexico.
Agreed. I'm going to go Rodriguez minus 120 money line, and I'm also going to do Rodriguez by submission plus 750.
Nice. I like that. I think that's a good spot too, because, if Bondar is getting the fight he wants, right, that might mean it's on the mat more often than not, right? Which I think, lends itself to that kind of situation. So I like that a lot.
All right, let's keep it moving. Next up, we got the lightweights. Claudio, Prince of Peru, Puelles. He's coming in 12-3, fighting out of Lima, Peru, 27 years old. He's 5'10 with 72-inch reach. He's going up against, is it Ferris?
Ferris,
the Smile Killer Ziam. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's do it. 14-4, coming off 2 consecutive victories. He's 26 years old, fighting out of France, and he is the taller fighter and has the longer reach. Ryan, this is another fight I like here, but I'm going to let you lead us off.
Yeah, John, I'll be interested to see which way you're kind of looking at this one.
Actually, I'm going to go. I think it's a lock. All right. I got Puelles by decision. All right.
All right.
Undervalued here.
Why would I invest in that after this guy just got absolutely fraud checked by Dan Hooker last time out? Tell me. Go ahead.
All
I
right.
might agree with you, but go ahead.
He has a
Explain.
bad performance against Dan Hooker. Sure, I'll give it to you. Dan Hooker is a legend of the game. He's
Yeah.
been doing well. He's been on a resurgence here of late. I never really factor in any one result too heavily, especially early in a career like this. I think it's got to go fight by fight. I think if you look at the rest of his career here, he's 5-2 in the UFC. Obviously, the last loss to Hooker, but before that, very successful start. 2 wins by KO, 7 by submission. He's going up against Zion, who's 14-4, only 4-2 in the UFC though. And I think there's a lot of extra weight being given to some of the submissions and KOs on his record. But if you look at his career in the UFC, all the fights to this point, I think outside of, let me pull this up for us so I get it right. Yeah, so outside of the rear naked choke loss to Terrence McKinney there, all the fights in the UFC have gone to decision. I don't think this is a guy that has the same upside that you're seeing out of a fighter like Dan Hooker. So I think that this opens the door for Puelles to get back on the winning way here. It's a plus 550 line, which I think given Ziam's career as we're looking at right here, I think there's a good chance this goes to decision, and I think there's a good chance that he can pull it out. What do you think?
Nice breakdown, John. I like that a lot. Yeah, no, I mean, I tend to favor the underdog here as well. I just don't, I don't see much on the Ziam side that I'm interested in. Most of his wins in the UFC have been over subpar opponents.
Not very active either.
Yeah, anybody he's fought with a pulse, has quickly kind of, worked him. I think he's going to get taken down, and if he gets taken down, I think Puelles is going to submit him. Right. Mm-hmm. So it ultimately comes down to that. I haven't seen Ziam be able to defend the submission in a way, and we've seen him lose by submission 3 times, right? And one of those coming pretty recently, obviously to a physical freak in Terrence McKinney, but Puelles is, obviously known for the leg lock and stuff like that, right? But is no joke when it comes to, controlling people on the mat and that kind of thing as well. So you're right, John. I do like that decision line just because of what you said, right? Kind of because of Ziam's durability and his ability to go the distance. It's probably the sharper play than
you only get plus 250 right now on submission. I agree with you. I think
I'm seeing
it goes up to plus 370 actually, depending.
Yeah, plus 350. But yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I think it is the sharper look. Because people will be looking that way, right? If you were going to get on the submission, it's probably time to get in on it now. But yeah, I think you might even be able to wait on that decision line a little bit, right? As money comes in on that obvious, quote unquote, obvious outcome, right, of the submission. You might even see.
I mean, he's sitting at plus 168 still straight up. So.
And I think that's if I play this fight, if I end up playing this fight, it's probably the way I play it on Puelles on the money line. Because I see your path to victory, but I also think, he's got such a huge advantage on the ground that I could see a submission as well.
Good breakdown. Let's keep it moving. Up next, the 5th fight of the night, we have Edgar Puru Chikale going up against Daniel Miojo Lacerda de Silva. Obviously, Ryan, this is the fight, the controversial, who was it, Keith Peterson?
Yeah, I think so.
There's a Keith Peterson.
No, it was the Keith Peterson was a different one, I think. This was...
No, I think it was Keith.
Okay.
I did read one article about it again, and I don't know why else Keith Peterson would be in my brain right now.
That's fair. That's fair.
Ryan,
yeah, John, I don't have I won't spend too much time on this one. I think this is a boring fight. I think it's a sad display by the UFC to just continue to like rebook this as if it's like entertaining at this point. I mean, Chira won the last time, and the guy just kind of like, I mean, I don't know. You can call it whatever you want, right? Like he was probably going to get submitted, but I just don't necessarily see the need to run this fight back. The
I
favorite
mean, yeah, like what?
the favorite price tag is definitely not justified though, just because these guys are so low level, right? So like if I were betting on the money line, I'd be betting on Lacerda just because he is dangerous. He puts on fun fights, right? There's a chance he gets Chirez out of there early. Like Chirez is not an 80% favorite versus anybody. He sucks too, you know? So it's just if the line continues to just balloon away from Lacerda, then, you know, I might be tempted to just like throw half a unit on there because I don't think Chirez is any good at all. Either is Lacerda, but I just think they're both so low level that anything could happen. It should be a closer line fight.
Yeah, I agree with you here. Not super excited for this one. The value I did see, I was looking at Chirez round 1 and round 2 KO. I think there's extra value on the sub just from the previous result. But if you look at Lacerda's career here, so you're seeing, I mean, yes, it's a it's a mix of loss style, but you're definitely seeing he's susceptible to the early finish KO TKO. So I think there might be some value. So that's what I'm going to go with. But let's keep it
What
moving.
number were you seeing that at, John?
I saw them separately. So I have round 1 plus 450, round 2 plus 600.
Okay.
So that was one I liked. I think they're going to come out swinging. He's the Mexican fighter. It's going to have the home crowd behind him. Might not be looking to submit. Might be angry at Keith Peterson. I hope Keith is the ref. That would be.
They just do it all over again.
That would be a good twist. All right. Next up, we got the flyweights going at it. Jesus Aguilar, 9-2, opened up as the slight underdog. Another Mexican fighter coming in at 27 years old, going up against Mateus Bocao Mendonca, 10-2, coming off those 2 losses consecutively in his last fights. Open up as the slight favorite here. Ryan, I think I kind of like the underdog again here. You're seeing the line move slightly towards Aguilar.
A lot this last day though, because you were seeing. I mean, I was seeing Mendonca at like minus 150 yesterday. He's down to minus 125 when I look now.
Yeah, it's the same line I'm getting. Yeah, so exactly. I mean, I think you got Jesus coming in 9-2. He just had that knockout victory, I believe, over Shannon Ross. Obviously, though, more of a submission threat. Ryan, what do you think here? Do you agree with the market moving towards Jesus?
Yeah, John, this is a tough one for me. I'll tell you why. I've lost money on Mateus Mendonca his first 2 UFC fights. You know, he was one of the guys like when I feel like I first started like watching tape more seriously and stuff like that I taped and I like his game. I mean, I think he's a solid fighter. He's one of those other guys coming out of that shoot box camp with Charles Oliveira, right? Is kind of crazy in that style, right? And is a little wild, but he's very well rounded in that, you know, he has a very solid game on the feet. He's a submission threat as well. But his 2 UFC performances have been, you know, ugly, especially his last one, Nate Maness, like losing by first round KO. That is just not what you want to see. He missed weight. Yeah, I mean, there's not much in the last 2 performances that I've necessarily liked. But I think he's got a better skill set. I think he can stay safe on the ground, and I think on the feet, this is night and day. I don't think that Aguilar has anything on the feet. I think Shannon Ross is a bum, and Aguilar knocked him out as a result of that. But like there is a reason that Aguilar wins all of his fights by submission in the past, and I just don't know that his grappling edge is enough to get him over that hump here. So I like Mendonca to be able to keep it on the feet for the most part and win either by knockout or by a closer decision. But yeah, I think the line's pretty much right? But I suppose I'm headed back to the window to lose money for the third time in a row on one fighter, and then he will be cut from the UFC, and the cycle will have completed itself. So
I think that's a great breakdown. I probably will stay away from this fight. I looked at the submission line for Jesus here, but only at plus 325. I don't think that's good value, to your point, with a fighter like Mendoka. So probably stay away. I don't know. You're 10-2. You come into the UFC, you lose 2 consecutively. I don't like
it's
the
not a
look.
good look either. So I agree. I think he's better. I think he is better than his UFC performances have indicated so far.
That's fair. All right.
And so
Riding with the slight favorite in Mendoka. Let's keep it moving. Fight 7. We have Christian Quinones. What's his nickname here? Let's get it up. Christian Problema Quinones going up against Raoni Barcelos. 18-4 for Christian, coming in off a loss, open as a slight underdog, fighting out of Mexico. They're almost all Mexico versus Brazil, it feels like, on Saturday. He is the much younger fighter coming in with the 9-year advantage on Barcelos. 5'8". They're both 5'8", and Raoni has the slight reach advantage. He's coming in 17-5, but you can see it there, has been struggling as of late. He did open up as the favorite here. So, Ryan, are you back on the older fighter to get back on the winning ways?
Yeah, John. I mean, this is an interesting fight. Quinones had a lot of hype kind of coming in as of late, right? Up until his last loss. So I think you're kind of getting people on other sides of the spectrum here, right? Where Quinones was kind of touted as a prospect, lost his last fight outright. And then you got Barcelos, who's lost a couple in a row. But, you look at some of his wins before that, right? Or just the level of competition he was facing, right? And
yep.
I mean, it's elite, right? And I mean, he was one of those guys who kind of came into the MMA space late, and was quickly given some of those higher level fighters and performed very well against them, right? And I think the question here is, has Quinones developed to the level where he's on the level of a guy like Hani Barcelos, right? Because I think the floor you're getting with a guy like Hani is very high, right? I think he is just a very well-rounded, capable fighter. And unless you go out of your way to beat him, right? Like, he is not going to lose the fight. And I just don't know that Quinones has the tools to like find a finish, right? To really impact himself, in the way Barcelos can, right? I think Barcelos will probably have a little bit more power on the feet, and I tend to favor him on the feet a little bit. And I mean, his wrestling and his jiu-jitsu game are very solid. He doesn't use them very much in the UFC, but I mean, that was kind of his base before he came into MMA. So I tend to lean on that as well, right? Yeah, the line's about right. I haven't talked my way into a Barcelos bet yet. You're kind of seeing it all over the place, depending on where you look. You're seeing as low as minus 170, as high as minus 200, right? At that minus 170 line, I'd put a unit on it, right? I do think he wins this fight. But you start to get over minus 200, and I think you're just there's more variables, because Barcelos is on the decline, right? For sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think in this one, I think I'm going to fade the line movement here. You're seeing Barcelos, he's moving from minus 150 to minus 195 when I took a look. I don't know if I get it. I mean, he's got 4 losses in his last 5. Obviously, to your point, he has been at top competition, but he's coming in off that 2 fights ago. He had that KO loss to Umar. And I think, as we've seen, as we talked about at the top of the podcast, you hit a certain age in UFC where it's downhill quickly. And I think this is an interesting buy low spot for Christian. Obviously, like you said, coming in off that loss. So
You're right, John. It's a buy. I mean, it's a me betting on Hani in this spot is
no, I get it, and I get why
no.
it's
I mean, but
moving.
it's more. I don't know. I tend to think it's more bias or more
I mean, so the one I like,
exposure because you're right, John. You look at the external factors, and I mean the line doesn't dictate it being as wide as it is, right? And I think that's what you got to come back to, especially in MMA betting sometimes, right? Where you got to go with the data you have, right? And I think you try and extrapolate, and yeah, that might make you rich once in a while, but like if you go back to the realities of what you're seeing before you, right? Like, okay, then you can get a pretty good indication a lot of the time, I think.
totally agree, and I like the decision here. You look at Barcelos. If you go into his career here, we'll walk you through it. He does have that KO loss, like I said, to Umar here, but you look, his last finish dates all the way back to 2019, going up against Carlos Huacan. Um, and I think to your point, Ryan, I'm not really seeing the same threat out of Quinones either. So I think this is a fight that can get to the distance. I was pretty surprised to see under 2.5 as the favorite here. Um, I guess they
Yeah,
might
no,
see.
I like that, John. That's a good way to look at it. And I mean, especially if you're looking at the underdog, right? I mean, don't shy away from just the straight underdog price, but you'll probably see a lot of value on that decision line just based on what you're saying.
Agreed. Let's keep it moving. Up next, we have the lightweights coming in. Manuel Loco Torres coming in 14-2. This fight opened up nearly even money. He is fighting out of Mexico, Mexico, 28 years old, and he's going up against Chris the Problem Duncan. 4 straight victories, coming in 11-1, fighting out of Scotland. He is 2 years older. Ryan, are you backing the home country here, or are you going with the Problem Duncan?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting fight, John. It's the first fight on the main card we're gonna see. Uh, I guess it's just a question of how well you rate Chris Duncan, because Manuel Torres is a good prospect, but we haven't seen him against super high level of competition. But that's true of Chris Duncan as well. Chris Duncan did have a nice win his last time out. I think he beat Ashmouz,
And to
right?
be clear, Torres is sitting at -191 right now, so he's been
But
moving.
that has ballooned a lot lately.
Yeah,
If you were to look at it in the last couple days, right, it sat a lot closer. Um, and I think that line adjustment was correct. Just based on kind of the hype we see behind Torres, right? The first fight on the main card, in the card in Mexico, right? Like, they know what they're doing and who they're putting on there, right? He's won 5 fights in a row, and he's looked good in the UFC. Duncan just, he's a serviceable fighter in every respect. He is going to give you, a good fight, but I think Torres ultimately has enough tools to kind of outstrike him on the feet. And I mean, I think he kind of holds a bit of the edge everywhere, right? Like, I think these are comparable fighters in many ways. But I just think Torres is improving more rapidly, has more draw, is the promotional A side here. So I like Torres. But again, at the current number, I don't really see any value in it. But yeah, that's the way I'd be looking. I'll get more into the props as the week goes on, John, and see what FanDuel and some of these other kind of books open up props at. But yeah, I like the Torres side of things.
I think you nailed this one spot on. This was one as I went through. Didn't feel great about it. Obviously, like you said, we already saw a lot of line adjustments. You can still find a pretty big range, but for me, I think to your point, not really sure how to rate Chris Duncan here, so I'm going to stay away. Maybe throw Torres in a parlay or two, but not feeling great about this one.
Yeah, this is one to take another look at, John, because it's like I don't know. I say it from a DFS perspective and stuff too, right? Like some of these ones where it's harder to get that read, I think if you can take that stand definitively one way or another, right? Like, I mean, from a betting line perspective, obviously it matters, but this is more of a DFS comment, right? If on some of those ones where there is more groupthink one way or another, right? Or I guess more of a consensus one way or another, right? I guess if you can find your own edge there, or just your own opinion, right? It's not necessarily an edge, but I think more often than not, right, it gets away from whatever everybody else is playing,
Totally agree. I mean, I think those are the ones, especially DFS, to your point. And I think it is actually a good model if you go through it and see the ones that either on Twitter or on podcasts are kind of the consensus line, or the ones that are really tough to pick yourself. I think those are the ones for DFS, especially when there's the high upside scenario. So I think that's a great breakdown there, Ryan. We'll have to put together some more content for our DFS fans out there. We know you're diving into DraftKings each and every Saturday. Let's have you walk us through the straw weights, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep this one quick. We've got Yasmin Yergui versus Sam Hughes. Yergui is the significantly better prospect. Has looked fantastic. Many people thought, she's going to be making a run for the title. But then she came out and fought, the lesser Nunes and lost by first round KO. I think John cashed that bet, if I remember. We had a Cage Cash podcast episode where John picked a Nunes KO in that spot. But yeah, Yergui is the better fighter everywhere here. Sam Hughes is not very good. But I mean, at -5 or 600 or whatever it's up to now, like that's a ridiculous line. Just because she got knocked out in her last fight, right, against terrible competition. But the thing is, I mean, Nunes had that athleticism and power that Sam Hughes like absolutely does not have, right? So I don't see any finish equity from Sam Hughes, which is essentially the only way I see you beating Yergui, because she's going to outpoint you over 15 minutes. So it's definitely Yergui. Wouldn't even parlay it just because the line's terrible. And I mean, she was just a -500 favorite and she lost. I mean, it is different circumstances. I do want to point that out. I feel much more confident in her in this spot than I did in her last spot as a -500 favorite. But yeah, John, how are you looking at this one?
I agree. This one I went through, kind of screamed, stay away from me. So I'm going to agree with you there. I like Yasmin, but not really seeing enough to really even dig into the props here. I think keep it moving. Next up, we have the bantamweights. We have the return of Paul El Nino Problema Rosas Jr. He is now, he's still 19. That's crazy. It feels like he's been around so long at this point. 8-1, coming in off that redemption win over Terrence Mitchell. He opened up as the heavy favorite here. And he's going up against Pretty Ricky Turklos, 12-3, also coming off a victory in his last fight. He's fighting out of Houston, Texas. Ryan, is Paul Rosas Jr. going to get back on the train to the top here?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because he opened up a bigger favorite. This is kind of a spot where Tercios had a lot of love kind of when he first came into the UFC, and then had some pretty ugly performances, even in his last time out in a win, right? I mean, he's a volume puncher who doesn't land a whole lot. Like, it's just a lot of like, throwing it out there and not really doing a whole lot. I mean, the big question here is, can he survive any of the grappling from Rosas. The one thing is I think Tercios has good cardio, and we've seen Rosas's cardio be suspect, if not bad, right? So I think that's why you're seeing, I don't think Rosas is very good. I think he is a strong wrestler, and physically very dominant, but I think he's a 19-year-old without a lot of, intelligence in other way. Like, I don't know. I don't necessarily see him as like the
Prodigy.
the uber prodigy of like, he's going to continue, like he will continue to develop. Right. And I don't know that Terci, like, to be clear, I'm picking Rosas in this fight. But I don't know. I just don't think he really needs to get better at striking and kind of just like his overall game and pacing and everything else, right? Because I think against any serious level of competition, right, any non-layup spot, I think he could get fraud checked pretty quickly. So, I mean, I like him in this spot, but he's not somebody I'm betting on.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good breakdown. I think I'm a little more bullish on Rosas. I think to your point, it is in the short term, there's still a lot to work on, but I think there's a fighter, to your point, who can dominate on the ground when it matters. And I think at some point here, you're going to start seeing some pretty large jumps for his game, especially if he is one who's going to make it to a championship fight or the top of the rankings. I think only 19 years old, as we talked about. Fight to fight, I think we're going to see a lot of growth out of Rosas here. To your point, though, Ryan, we are seeing Tercios. His line has moved down. Let me confirm it here. So he opened up. Tercios opened up at plus 250. Now he's down at plus 185. So we are seeing people see the value on Rosas or betting against Rosas, which I think, especially given the more name value on Rosa's side, shows that Tercios has a pretty decent path to victory here. But I think I agree with you, Ren. You're not seeing enough value on Rosas when it comes to props, just because he's a pretty predictable fighter at this point, but not willing to take the risk against him. So I'm going to stay away from this one. If the line moves a little more, I mean, we're seeing Rosas at minus 220 now. I think
and it wouldn't shock me. I mean, I think the line adjustment was correct, right? But I think it's now.
I was gonna say I think he might start being a parlay piece for me. I think I feel pretty good about him getting the job done in this one, even if it isn't a perfect fight. So maybe if that gets closer to 200 before the fight, I'll pull the trigger there. Anything else, Ryan, or let's keep it moving?
Let's keep it moving.
All right. Next up, the fourth fight of the main card. We got Daniel Golden Boy. Is it Zellhuber?
Zellhuber, I think.
Zellhuber. The I's and L's. I messed it up with Tercios as well, but anyways, we got the Golden Boy coming in 14-1, 2 consecutive victories. He is another Mexican fighter, another young Mexican fighter on the card, coming in at just under 25 years old. He's 6'1", 156 pounds, very tall, very skinny, 77-inch reach. I think that's going to be a major factor in this one. Going up against Francisco Prado, 12-1. He's coming off a win in his last fight over Azatar, but he does have that decision loss to Jamie Malarkey. I think that's the one where Jamie Malarkey was just like dominant, right? Like I'm trying to remember, but he opened up as the pretty heavy underdog over plus 200 to start the week, and he is just under 22 years old. So a very young fight here. Ryan, how are you feeling? I think I like the Mexican fighter here yet again, but is that correct?
Yeah, probably. Zellhuber is the A side from a prospect perspective, but Prado's interesting just because of his age, his rapid improvement, right? I mean that first fight to, was his first fight in the UFC, right? That he lost to Jamie Mullarkey. So, do you give him a pass for that, right? He comes back and wins his next fight. He didn't look awesome though in that next fight.
Yeah.
I would have liked to see a little bit more progression transparently, and I expected to see a little bit more. So yeah, that's kind of why I'm not as bullish on the Prado side of things. Like he definitely has the power upside here. I think he has a good chance of, catching Zellhuber or something, right? Like I think that's an interesting way to look at this, right? And probably a contrarian way to look at this. But yeah, Zellhuber has continued to kind of look better and better, and kind of continues to move up the ranks. I do like him in the spot. And just remind me, John, who are his UFC fights so far?
So he came in the Contender Series, got the win over Almeida. Then in his UFC debut, had a decision loss to Trey Ogden, and then 2 wins. First over Lando Venata, and then Christos Giagos.
Yeah, so that's the thing too, where again, like I don't think this line should get that wide because similarly, like in losing to Trey Ogden, I would argue that's a worse loss than Francisco Prado losing to Jamie Mullarkey, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, but he came back and won his next 2 fights after that, right? And now is kind of against subpar fighters, right? And is now getting the benefit of kind of the odds movement in his favor, right? So what is to say Prado is not in that exact same spot from 2 fights ago, right? I just think you're buying in a little bit on the favorite here, unless you're seeing something specifically in Prado that you're disliking. Just because I don't know that the two victories he's had as of late are over fighters that I would rate highly enough that it warrants a big favorite price tag in the UFC, right? But yeah, I mean, I think I do favor him, and I think he wins this fight. But just an interesting kind of tidbit, right? I mean, it is so much about recent performance, right? Because I mean, Jamie Mullarkey would be, a significant favorite over Trey.
I'm looking at it here. I mean, he's going up against Mullarkey at 284 pay-per-view event. Like
and I think he stepped in there on late notice, if I remember correctly, as well. I think
so he's coming in there at 20 years old, 21 years old. Big event in Australia, going up against Jamie Mullarkey. To your point, has put together a little bit of a run here. I do like Zellhuber's profile. I mean, I think he's a versatile fighter. He's got the reach. He's going to have the home crowd. But I think you may have talked me out of this one as being a fight on my card. Maybe I'll look. What are we seeing any value on an over under here at all?
Yeah, I haven't looked too much at it, John, to be transparent, but I tend to like
we're seeing pretty even money to go the distance.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to favor a finish just because I think there's probability on both sides, right? Just because we've seen Prado finished.
Well, this is high up in the card for these two.
Yeah, and I mean, Zellhuber has less finishing equity, right? Just from on a fight to fight perspective, right? Like if he had 10 fights, he's finishing 5 of them, whereas Prado's finishing 8 of them or something, right? Because Prado's just a more powerful guy, but I think that it's Prado's more likely win outcome, right? If you're betting on the underdog. So, I think that justifies it to an extent, right? And then we've seen questions with Prado's durability. So yeah, I tend to favor an under in that spot, but it's a great fight. Like a lot of these fights, John, they're good fights. It's just I don't know that there's a ton of value either way from a betting perspective with kind of how these lines have shaped out. But I think it's going to be a fun card for sure.
You are spot on there. With that said, we got 2 more fights to break down for you. You told us at the top of the podcast These are the two great fights. First of all, we got the co-main event. Featherweights going at it. Yair El Pantera Rodriguez coming in at 18-4. He last fight obviously went up against Volk. Pretty much dominated start to finish there. But before that, we all remember the win over Josh Emmett, the win over Brian Ortega, as we see here. Lost to Holloway before that. So as we see, Rodriguez has been going up against the best. Has two losses to maybe the two greatest fighters in his division. So he opened up as the slight favorite here, minus 165. Another Mexican fighter coming in at 31 years old. Honestly thought Yair was a little younger than that. He's going up against Brian T. City Ortega, 15-3, but all three of those losses in his last five. That includes his most recent fight, which was the Yair Rodriguez. Ryan, is T. City going to get revenge here in Mexico?
Yeah, John, this is a really interesting fight, and I've been going back and forth on it in my mind. The line's been going back and forth a little bit, but we've definitely seen some movement as of late towards Brian Ortega. This line's getting a lot tighter, closer to a pick'em. But at this point, I'm gonna side with Yair Rodriguez, and
I'm seeing minus 150 right now still.
I mean, but it's getting down there though. I mean, it was plus 160 on Ortega, down to plus 140 earlier this week. Now you're seeing, plus 120s,
Yeah.
plus 130s. So it's closing for sure. And, I think the thing in this spot is they saw the last fight where Ortega won round one, I think arguably, right? But I just at such close odds, I'm betting on the more active fighter, the guy who I favored heading into that first Ortega matchup anyway, right? I think if Ortega can implement the grappling effectively and XYZ, right, like he looks like a big favorite. But I think we assumed that in the last line, right? And the last line closed around minus 200 or something.
Mm-hmm.
I struggle to see that much that's changed, and I struggle to give $1 of value essentially to Brian Ortega for one round 2 years ago, post broken arm injury, right? So at this line, I'm very tempted to look at the Yair Rodriguez money line. And I just think, again, it's a buy low spot on Yair. To your point, he's lost to the two best featherweights to ever fight ever. Mm-hmm. And nobody else, right? Yeah. So I don't know that it's not a situation like Volk where he's over the hill, right? He's 31 years old. Like he is gonna do this for a long time, and I don't see him going anywhere. Where I don't know. Ortega's a lot. Sometimes you just look at social media. He's just very I don't know.
I agree. I think you brought up a great point there, just in activity. Sure, Yair had the difficult performance against Volk in his last one out, but that fight against Emmett, I mean, I remember those leg kicks to the body and to Emmett, and Emmett had the injury, but it was a very impressive run there for Yair. He's going to be fighting in front of the home crowd here. I think you broke it down well. I mean, I think it is priced pretty well. I think it makes it a tough one to bet on for that reason, but mostly out of fandom here, I think I'm going to be just jumping on the Rodriguez side. I think he can get it done. I think it'll be a great atmosphere. And I was listening to Ariel Helwani say that he wins this. It'll be him versus Tapuria in Spain, which would be pretty sweet. So I am going to root for that. But yeah, I think this should be, I mean, to get this level of a co-main for a fight night.
5 rounds as well, John.
Yeah, I mean, going off some of the fight nights we've gone through in the past couple of years. Pretty cool to see, and I think this will be a big bounce back spot for Yair. All right, on to the main event. If I can get my thing open. All right, my guy. We're going to the flyweights. Brandon the Assassin Baby Moreno coming in at 21-7-2. Had that loss in his last fight to Pantoja. He opened up as the minus 250 favorite here. Yet another Mexican fighter fighting in front of the home crowd. He comes in at 30 years old, right in the peak of his career, going up against Brandon Raw Dog Royval. I didn't know that was his nickname.
Yeah, dude, the Raw Dog.
15-7, coming off a loss. Same thing to Pantoja, but that was just 2 months ago. So quick turnaround here for the Raw Dog. Open up as plus 205. Ryan, I'm a big fan of the Assassin Baby. Can you talk me out of backing Moreno in some shape or form here?
You know, John, I'm not even going to try. I like Brandon Moreno a lot in this spot. At the money line, right, I don't know that it's justified, but I'll continue to look at props throughout the week. I think a decision or something later, right, like an over couple rounds plus Moreno is an interesting spot to look at. But he could find a finish or something.
It's at minus 300 now, so it is kept moving towards Moreno.
It's definitely moving towards Moreno, and I just think we saw Pantoja dominate him in a way that I think Moreno could have very similar success doing. Yeah. Right? Like, he is not quite as good of a pure grappler, but he does have good like wrestling control. And I think, he could, like, Pantoja dominated him on the ground, right? I think even if he was 40% less dominant, right, like, it's still a very close fight, even in just that respect. I mean, I think the striking is a little bit better and a little bit crisper on the Moreno side, maybe not as flashy and, fun as a guy like Royval, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think, this is playing into, you got the champion kind of coming off the one fall from grace, right? But never a champion where it was like it was an actual fall from grace, because he's so young and it's so, like,
that was a close fight.
Right. And it was like there was never a thought that he was going anywhere, right?
And before that, it was only Figueiredo.
Just loses a championship fight, right? Is kind of either offered, hey, you start over, or hey, step in 2 months out, right? Like, most people know about their fights 4 months out, right? He just fought 2 months ago, lost his title fight, right? Got absolutely embarrassed in that fight for the most part, right? And now he's supposed to come in and fight the best fighter in this division for the last 10 years and be successful. I just don't. I don't see it being a very high likelihood. I like Royval. I think he's a fun fighter, right? But I just don't see it being a very high likelihood outcome for him. So I think the line's probably, again, I think it's right. It's crazy in MMA if you start betting over minus 300, right? Just because and especially at such a high level, because they are both so dangerous, right? And Royval is so dangerous that you never know, right? Like, he could catch him in something or could find something early. But you've got to favor the Assassin Baby, the Lego playing Mexican in this spot, I think, John.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree here. I don't know if there's a great bet, and to your point, minus 300, even with a guy I like a lot and think is the better fighter here, does get a little worrisome, but feel really good. I mean, I think this will be a great DFS play, get a lot of Moreno exposure. Tough just in that it will be a popular play, but I think this is one where he can really dominate, to your point, like Pantoja. take it 5 rounds, carry it late in the fight, get a lot of takedowns, get a lot of strikes. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I was trying to look to see if I could pull up the rankings for the weight class. I mean, it's a quick turnaround here, especially to your point after a pretty
I don't
convincing.
get it. I don't get it at all. Like
Yeah.
I don't get it. I don't know why you would do this. Other than what I just described, right? That like, hey, you can fight Moreno in 2 months, or you can, fight the number 10 guy and like kind of reset yourself. But I don't know. I just don't think he'd be that far down the deck. So obviously he's confident in himself and probably thinks, oh, I had a bad performance against Pantoja that last time out, right? But I thought it wasn't that he had a bad
I
performance.
mean, look at this competition
He had
before that.
some holes in his game, right? And I don't see any reason Moreno can't exploit those same holes. Like he can't have gotten better at getting up from bottom in 2 months. Like he hasn't been in the gym. He would just lost. You know what I mean? So like if Moreno can do that same thing, I mean, yes, it's going to be harder for him to do that.
Yeah. And to your point, I don't think anything on this resume makes you think he can get it done at this top level. I mean, obviously he can break through, but you look at the competition, it appears, and obviously really basing it off Pantoja and Moreno, but I think outside of those two and maybe Figueiredo, those really are the bellwether in the division. So seeing those victories in the interim, yes, Kai Kara France, obviously impressive. Tim Elliott back in 2020. But I mean, hasn't been able to. I mean, it's gotten finished and 2 of them and dominated in the third when going up against that top competition. So maybe it's a Moreno parlay. Maybe we look to your point for something like start the 4th round and finish, or start the 4th round and win. So I agree with you there. I mean, I'm getting worried. I think I took every Mexican fighter. I don't.
Well, I mean that sounds like. I mean, the Canada parlay cashed last year, and
It
then
did. I mean, it can happen.
the Canadian guys went like 1-7 the next one. So I mean, you're on this is the first Mexican fight card, so do this one and then just fade the next one. That's right. That would be history repeating itself. So go big on the Mexican fighters is essentially the conclusion from the podcast today, Joe.
Yeah, Ryan, to your point. With that said, I think we wrapped it up well. We took you guys through our reactions to UFC 300. We broke down everything from UFC 297. And I think we walked you through 13 very exciting fights. Ryan, you said it. Maybe not the same name value, but I think when you dive in here, a lot of close fights, a lot of exciting prospects. It should be a lot of fun on Saturday night. Is there anything you want to close us out with before we say adios to the Cage Cash faithful?
Not much, John. I am really excited for this one. I think we're going to get a great couple of fights up on the top of the card. Really interested to see the return of TCD Ortega. Obviously, he's American, but kind of has that Mexican connection as well, right? So it's just going to be a really fun card, I think, all the way around, right? With a lot of, as you said, Mexican versus Brazil fighters. And, I just think there's going to be a lot of hype in that building. So really excited to see it. I think we could see some quick finishes or some crazy finishes, right? Just as a result of.
And I did see a video on Twitter today. I believe the last time they were in Mexico City, there was the eye poke, right? From, was it Yair? There was an eye poke. There's a great video on Twitter of Bisping dodging bottles and ice and glass. So
yeah,
it should be quite the atmosphere in there.
Yeah, it's going to be great, John. But really enjoyed breaking this one down, and we're going to be back next week to break down the next card and looking to cash some bets. So give us a follow, drop a like and a comment if you enjoyed the episode. Drop a comment of your favorite fight on this card and who you're thinking. Let us know if you disagree, if you're going to be taking any of the fighters against the Mexicans this week. But John and I will be hoping to ride a biased parlay to
Let's
cash.
do it.
All right. Cage cash out.
Hell yeah. Nice. I mean, we went longer than ever.